Meow, meow. Hey guys, what's up and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, and uh, this is Crime Time. I'm your host. I'm sit down and I talk about some true crime. So today we're going to be talking about the Ardenwald axe murders, and this is another vintage true crime case from Oregon. Oregon. This happened on June 9th of 1911. This is an oldie. So this is an unsolved mass murder that happened on the early morning of June 9th in 1911 in Ardenwald, Oregon. So this is a neighboring community to Portland. The victims in this case are the Hill family. So that's William Hill, Ruth Crowing Hill. Then we also have Ruth's two children from a previous marriage. That is Philip Rintoul and Dorothy Rintoul. And all four were bludgeoned to death with an axe. Not to confuse you with the Villisca axe murder, but because Anyhow, yeah. So both of the females in this case, so Ruth and Dorothy, they were both sexually assaulted. It's believed that the murders are motivated by a sexual counterpart, and possibly the work of a sex maniac. That's literally how they put it in the newspaper articles. So the landowner that lived adjacently to the Hills' house, his name is Nathan Harvey. He was charged with the murders in December 20th, 1911, but these charges were dropped not even a week later. So, and when they further investigated him, they ceased his possible involvement in February of 1912. Yeah. So there is another suspect that they had. The two other ones. One is Edward Ramsey, and the other one is William Riggin. William Riggin actually confessed to having participated in the murders, but provided very inconsistent accounts when it came to it. And he confessed in 1917, so 6 years after. So basically a rundown of this case. Spring of 1911, they move into a cottage in this area, into Ardenwald. And basically, William built the cottage that they moved into by himself, and the family moved in early May of that year. And on the morning of June 8th, Ruth, she visited a law office of her brother and her father in Portland, and they stated that she seemed disturbed about something, and that of which she never talked about. So something was initially really off. Approximately 8 a.m. on June 9th, the wife of a neighbor, the neighbor's name is C.W. Matthews, but they don't have the wife's name. I couldn't find it. She knocked on the door of the home after noticing that William didn't leave, which, I mean, it's a good thing that we have neighbors that pay attention to these things. So she was confused because he didn't leave at the normal time he does every day, and this is so he could catch a streetcar to go to his job at the Portland Natural Gas Company. When she didn't get an answer at the door, she then peeked into the front window, and this is when she saw the bloodied body of Dorothy laid on the floor. Dorothy was 4. So the Clackamas County Sheriff, Ernest Mass, he arrived shortly after she reported the crime. And it was estimated that the murders happened at about 12:45 a.m. And this is based on a broken clock, which that can also remind people, there's clocks and axe murders. There's some sort of underlying funk with them in the United States. But yeah, that clock stopped at that time, along with a neighbor's report that a dog began barking loudly around this time because something set him off. So the bodies of Ruth and William were discovered in their bed. They were entangled. Ruth was lying underneath her husband's. It was determined that after William being bludgeoned to death with the axe, Ruth was then struck twice in the head. After they both were dead, 8-year-old Philip was then bludgeoned to death, with Dorothy being the last one to die. So the axe was actually left in the house, and it was propped against the foot of Dorothy's bed. This is another thing that makes it really strange and like, wow, with the other axe murders in the United States. But so it was finally determined that the axe didn't belong to the Hill family, it had been stolen from the porch of Joseph Delk, who lived 3/4 of a mile north of the house. Most of the windows of the house had been covered by cloth and garments by the perpetrator to conceal the crime. There was some jewelry missing from the crime scene and other valuables, but money was left behind. So this led the sheriff to believe that robbery wasn't part of this. Because this was such a violent and sexual of nature crime, they believed that the assailant could have been a pedophile. But in order to assist the investigation, Sheriff Mass, that was the leading sheriff on this case, he brought in a bloodhound from Seattle to complete searches of the area, but nothing came of it. So when the coroner examined the bodies, he stated that William's injuries had left his head completely chopped to pieces in the right side, especially right above, like the right side above his eye. And the assault deformed his entire face. Ruth similarly sustained a severe skull fracture that extended from above her right eye across her whole face, as well as another fracture that broke her teeth and her lower jaw. Dorothy had also skull fractures to both the front and the back of her head from an axe blade. Philip's head wounds appeared to have been inflicted by the actual handle of the axe. So, based on what they found on Ruth's body, it was determined that she was raped after death. And with Dorothy, she was sexually assaulted prior to them killing her. There were bloody fingerprints found smeared on Dorothy's body as well as on Philip's arm. So, yeah. So we had Edward Ramsey, that is a vagrant that they were suspicious of. And they arrested him based on a series of complaints that were spanning across a few years against him. But he was cleared of any suspicion. And then we have Nathan Harvey, which is a neighbor. He was charged with the murder of all 4 victims. He was a native to actually Iowa. And he apparently had a dispute with William before the murder. And it was discovered that he already had been loosely connected to these crimes. Also, in 1894, a woman named Mammy Welch was murdered in a strawberry patch on Harvey's property, and her body was found lying next to an adjacent road. There's also other murders that kind of like surround him, and that is the mysterious death and murders of one of his brothers shot their mother to death before killing himself. Happened in 1896. And then in 1899, another one of his brothers was found drowned in a mill pond in Milwaukee. So he was just surrounded by death. So when they questioned his neighbors, they reported that several women had told him that Harvey made inappropriate proposals to them, as well as insulting them. And the sheriff said he had absolute proof that Harvey had taken the last train to Ardenwald through the Interbin Railway, which that's the same railway that William worked on. Yeah. And this particular railway came into Ardenwald, or it arrived in Ardenwald at 12:25 a.m. on the night of June 9th. 2 witnesses also state that they saw Harvey exit the train at the Ardenwald station at this time. So, despite the charges against him and the number of people who professed his innocence and protest his arrest, he was charged with the murders. There were meetings that were held to basically figure out if he was guilty or not. and they ended up collecting over 500 signatures to call for the charges to be dropped. However, people feared him because they didn't know if he was involved. And eventually, the sheriff Mass, he was convinced that with him behind bars, they could figure out who killed them. But unfortunately, there's no there was nothing to fully tie him to the murders. He was released during a preliminary hearing, and they closed the investigation when it came to Harvey in 1912. So our last one is a man named William Riggin. William Riggin confessed in 1917 to shooting William Booth and Wilhelmina in October of 1915. And basically what he said is that he claimed to have witnessed the Hills murders with a man who went by the name of Brown, which was a Mexican man that he knew at the time, and also a man named Billy Flynn, or William Flynn. His alias was Edward Ramsey. So Riggin claimed that they met the men in Oregon City and they planned a robbery scheme. And according to Riggin, he watched outside the Hills home while Brown, armed with an axe, and Flynn entered to rob the family. He then claimed he waited outside the cottage for about 30 minutes, and then he heard children scream. And after the murders, Riggin claimed that Brown and Flynn exited the cottage with approximately $1,400 worth of gold and silver. And for his role in the robbery, he apparently was paid $1,000. But when they went to question him further about the events, instead of claiming in a formal statement, despite everything he said, he would then say that he participated in the robbery but not the murder. Yeah. There was two different accounts and they were very inconsistent, and they didn't know. So this crime remains unsolved. William Riggin was let go and he wasn't further investigated. I will have you know that this set of axe murders was described as one of the most brutal in Oregon history, and it's still talked about in folklore today. And also a very strange coincidence, the Villisca axe murders happened exactly 1 year and 1 day after the Ardenwald murders. And yeah, it's kind of messed up how close in time that these happen to one another, especially with, we talked about the clock, the coverings, like the way, there's a lot of similarities with these, and there's a lot of things that maybe we overlooked when it came to these cases and we didn't try to fully figure out. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's true crime case. It was definitely a hard one, the Ardenwald axe murders, but it's another crime that nobody really talks about. Like, we know about the Villisca axe murders, but people don't talk about axe murders that happened prior to that. It's like, it's the same thing when it comes to school shootings. Nobody really talks about school shootings that happened prior to Columbine, or like they talk about some after Columbine, like Sandy Hook that happened in Connecticut. They don't really talk about other ones. Or like Virginia Tech, that's another one. Or the shooting at Fort Hood. Nobody really, it's crimes like these that people don't really discuss that I want to bring into the limelight so you guys can hear about them. But that is the end of this lovely episode, and I hope you guys have a great day. Bye, guys.